A while back, I introduced you to the idea of photo transfer. This was in a holiday journal, and then in my art journal, I did a photo transfer and then made it into a mixed media sort of art journal page and so forth. I showed you that process and said, oh, how much fun it was and how I was really enjoying it. And the comment I got back was, yeah, I'd love to do that, but you've got a laser printer. This is a laser print, and I've only got inkjet. I can't do it, can I? And I know people say you can't do this with an inkjet, but I thought, do you know, let's have a look and compare them, see what the issue is, see what we can do to solve any of the problems. What I've selected for this very scientific experiment is a logo for an Open Studios event that I'm doing in May 2024. So if you're around in Berkshire and want to come and visit my studios, please do. Anyway, you can see I have reversed it, and that is really important. So that's number one. This has been printed out on a Brother laser printer. This has been printed out on a Canon inkjet printer, and straight away, or you can see the difference in the density of the print. Black and white image, and this is far blacker. This is the laser and this is the inkjet. Now it could be this is an old printer, but it is a new cartridge, so that's issue number one. Something else just immediately I notice is I had this on the side in the kitchen after I'd printed out. My dear family, as always, have managed to splash some water, and you can see how the inkjet ink has changed colour and has got splashed there when it got splashed there. And this is the issue that you get smearing with your inkjet printer that you don't get with the laser. We will carry on. Luckily, I printed extras. Let's just label. So this is laser. I mean, we can see the difference, but, you know, let's be scientific about it. And that was inkjet. I'm going to use this as my control. Just use one of these. And then I've been thinking about what we could do to this to see how we can stop some of this smearing and make sure we get a good crisp image transfer. First thing I thought we will do one that I do nothing to so we can compare. Second, I wondered about ironing it, because a laser printer uses a powder that is then heat set onto the paper, whereas an inkjet literally sprays ink onto the paper, which is why it's not bound so much. So I wondered if I heat it, whether that will help. And then I have some ideas. I wondered about spraying our print with some stuff. So I have an Ironlak, a workable fixative. All fixatives aren't the same, so I thought I would also try this Krylon fixative that I've got. Again, workable fixative. Fixatives are really a dilute, a weak varnish, so I thought I would try a full strength varnish, and this is a water-based varnish. It's got less solvents in than normal. So I'm going to spray our inkjet prints, let them dry, and then see how they transfer and whether that works or whether it makes it impossible. This really is an experiment, so the results you see will be a surprise to us all. We will label them all. We'll get rid of the ones that are already splodged. Paper I'm going to try and transfer onto is watercolour paper. It's £140, which is 300 grams per square metre. It's got a cold press surface. Reason I'm using watercolour paper is I'm a watercolour artist. The whole point for me of doing these image transfers is so I can do mixed media. Now I just need a piece of paper to protect my surface. And this is going to be the Ironlak fixative. Do read the instructions on any fixatives or varnishes you use. Try and use them outside because they are not good for your lungs. Make sure you shake them properly. You'll hear that rattle. That's all about making sure they're well mixed up before you use them. So I'm going to give that a good spray, as you saw, put it to one side and let it dry. This is a varnish that's made it all curl up, and that's actually quite interesting already because this fixative made it sort of go a little bit see-through. Hasn't happened with that piece. This is Krylon. While those are drying, I will get ahead with the 3 that I can do. So I've just written laser there so I remember. And the process, if you haven't seen the other video, I went through it all in detail. Make sure you've reversed it, then print it out. And we want to remove as much of the excess paper as possible. I personally think that it is better to rip the excess paper off rather than cut it, just because that ripped edge is easier to disguise. A straight cut edge is quite obvious in your work. We are going to stick it face down so we know where to put the glue. Let's just draw around it. So that is going to go there. And then this is Inkjet, nothing, Inkjet that we have ironed. To do this image transfer, you need a glue. Some people use Mod Podge, some people use a waterproof PVA. I like to use a matte gel medium, and I find that this Pabio Studio is quite cheap and really effective. Reason I like to use matte gel medium is, well, I'm using it elsewhere, so I've got it, but it is archival, and if I'm doing this so that I can add to my watercolours, I want it to behave itself. Just going to put some in a little dish. I'm going to need a glue sheet so I don't get glue everywhere. These aren't terribly big, so I just need a small brush. You could use, a foam applicator, anything, just something old and not posh. So I like to put the glue on the surface. We just want it on really evenly, make sure we've covered absolutely everything, and we do need to be careful of the edges. Then we put glue onto the print, and making sure the edges have lots of glue on them. Oh, I keep calling it glue, but the medium. And what we need to be careful of, we don't get it on the back of the paper because we don't want to waterproof the paper. We've got our pencil lines. We can now pop it in place, line it up, and make sure it is stuck down. Really make sure it is adhered. You could use a little brayer. You could use a credit card, a plastic card, obviously one that is not a current favourite with money on it. If any excess glue comes out of the side, make sure you wipe it off before you do it again, because, as I say, we don't want any medium on the back of the paper. That would waterproof the paper and make it hard to remove. Also use just a spoon, the back of a spoon, and burnish it. Now, these are small, so it's fine. If you're doing a larger piece, you have to work pretty quickly because this stuff dries quickly. Obviously depends how warm your working space is. You might need to do it in stages. If you were doing a really big transfer, you might need to sort of almost patchwork your work. That's interesting. This is my inkjet that I've done nothing to, and hopefully you can see some of that ink has smeared into the white. What I feared. It's the one that we've ironed, and again I can see a little bit of smearing of that ink. Maybe look quite as much as the other one, but maybe that's wishful thinking that ironing it actually helps. Don't know. To tell till the end. I'll go ahead and do the other 3 when they're dry, the ones we sprayed, and then I need to make sure this is dry. I would say a minimum of 2 hours. Overnight might be better. You really want it dry. I will also weight it down just to keep it flat by putting it under a heavy book. And as I say, it's just a case of drying it now. And look, there's a good heavy book to put on top. We'll come back. Make sure you wash your brush, because once it dries, it won't come out of your brush. And even if you've used an old one, you don't want to ruin it. I haven't left it overnight. I'm a little impatient to see what the results are. What you have to do is now remove the paper off the back. So you can dampen the paper and you can see that the ink starts to become visible. You could just use clean water and rub it on with your fingers like that. You could use a sponge to do this, like a scouring pad that you would use for washing up, but the danger of that is that you rub too hard and you remove lots of the ink. So I just like to use my finger in a circular motion, and I start to remove all these tiny bits of paper. And you just need to be patient, because if you rub too hard, you will start to lift the ink. If it gets dry, then just add a little bit more water and just feel, really use your sense of touch to feel how much paper you're removing. When you think you've removed enough paper, obviously get rid of the gungy bits. And this was our laser print, and you can see no ink has come off on those bits. Feel a bit of paper. Your watercolour paper, of course, needs to be tough enough to cope with this, because you don't want that pilling up. You could do a print transfer like this onto canvas, onto a wooden surface, whatever you like. I don't want to do that because I want to use this for mixed media, but you could. So the process would be absolutely the same. When it's dry, we'll be able to remove those pencil marks that we use for the position. Let me pull it closely to you. That's pretty good. I mean, some of that ink has lifted there, but luckily I don't like perfection. So that is looking good to me. We need to do exactly the same with the rest. And I might, just for the fun of it, start dampening those down so it can soak in while we're doing this. This is our Inkjet printer. I am expecting the ink to smear and for this to be a lot more fragile, so I'm going to be careful. Right, you can see that some of the ink is coming off in the paper. Well, I think that very graphically shows the difference between the laser print and the Inkjet. Loads of that ink has come off with the paper and we've got this pale shadow left behind. That might not be a problem for you. Depends entirely on the project you're doing. If you want a vintage photo transferred to paper, maybe that is absolutely fine. Of course, you want it really crisp and dark, then laser jet is going to be the way to go for you. So we can do an ink transfer, but it's different. Wet this, and can you see how that ink is moving and dissolving? This was the one I ironed in the hope that that would set the ink, and it doesn't appear to have. So good idea, Liz. Nah, hasn't worked. See again in the bits of paper I'm rubbing off how much ink is actually coming out with it. At any point you find one area of paper just won't rub off, it may be that you've got some of that matte medium on the back of your paper, and that has sort of waterproofed it, so that could be the explanation. One I ironed, Inkjet that I ironed, and it seems to have done something. It's a little bit darker than that, but not enough to really get me excited. It's the one that we put the varnish on, the water-based varnish. So I'm hopeful that maybe this will be better. What do we think? I think that's I mean, it's better than the nothing one, but it's not brilliant. This was the one that we sprayed with the fixative, the Ironlak fixative. Well, that's interesting. It feels harder to rub off the paper. So I wonder if the fixative has soaked through the paper and has really fixed it. That is way better. That has worked. Oh, good. Now, the downside seems to be that you can't blend the edges in quite as easily because it's harder to remove the paper. But if you're going to paint and use this in mixed media, that might not actually be an issue, mightn't it? Right, and the last one we're going to try was the one that I put the Krylon fixative on. I'm having to press really hard to rub that paper off. Krylon is one that most people say is a very good fixative as a workable fixative. And I think it's quite easy to get in the States, but not in the UK. In fact, a friend of mine went over to New York and I said to her, could she, if she happened to see a shop selling art materials, stationery type stuff, office supplies, could she see? And she managed to get me some and smuggled it back into the UK. Well, that is fascinating. The laser print is by far the winner. We knew that, didn't we? We knew using this method it was going to be tricky. I have to say I don't think it really did anything. This, if you wanted a vintage aged look, is perfectly acceptable. So what I would do is really boost your colour saturation before I attempted this sort of transfer, because we're going to lose a lot of ink. This is interesting. So this was the varnish, which I would have expected to actually fix it more, but the workable fixatives seem to have been pretty good. And again, if you like a vintaged aged look and a more random appearance, which fortunately I do, then I think that may be acceptable. Okay, so this isn't dry yet, so I can't rub out the pencil lines around. Just get some more of your matte gel, and we've got a little bit of a film of the very thin paper left over the top. But if you then put some more matte gel over the top, it sort of soaks through that and cleans up the image a bit, and it also gives a bit of tooth if you're going to work on it to do a mixed media piece. So what have we learnt from this? Well, yeah, we have learnt that if you want that crisp, dark transfer, you're going to have to invest in a laser printer, or potentially your local print shop would be able to print out for you if you don't want to go to the expense of a laser printer, of course. We have seen that actually if you like that vintage aged look, of course you can use an inkjet and use this process in the knowledge that potentially it's going to rub off, it is going to fade, it is going to break up a bit more. Bit disappointed, I don't think ironing made a huge difference. I hoped that heating would somehow set that ink, but it hasn't. So the way forward, if you've got an inkjet printer, I think is to print your photo and then coat it with either a fixative or a varnish. That water varnish wasn't perfect, but certainly was an improvement from nothing. And in this little test, I reckon the winner is probably that Ironlak fixative. So if you've got a workable fixative, do your inkjet print, then spray it, let it dry, and that will stabilise the ink a bit more. Makes getting the paper off a little bit harder, but hey, a little bit of extra work to save the cost of buying a new printer seems worth it. So I hope you enjoyed that scientific experiment and hope you've learnt as much from it as I have.